Well, welcome back. My name is Prabhas Moghe. I'm the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, and it's my pleasure to moderate the second roundtable for the morning. This is going to be called Laboratories of Climate Citizenship. Carrie Ferraro, an Assistant Professor of Practice. Carrie, if you just want to just be acknowledged. Professor of Practice in Math and Science Learning Center will be serving as our digital moderator for this session and will be monitoring the chat. So any virtual attendees out there, please put your questions that you may have on the chat forum. Also, for virtual attendees, please put any questions you have for our speakers, especially. You might want to indicate if you have them specifically for a particular speaker on the chat. So our conversation now starts with the premise that the climate crisis is upon us. We're continuing to be resilient, creative, imaginative, and collaborative in dealing with what we now consider to be an unavoidable aspect of our lives. It sort of mirrors a bit what Brian Strom said about the pandemic. We recognize that the Rutgers' most enduring contribution to the climate transformation will not merely be our achievement of what we plan to do, which is carbon neutrality, net zero emissions. These are conversations I remember having with Bob Kopp several years ago. And I'm delighted that there seems to be a convergent momentum around this initiative from all campuses, and especially bolstered by President Holloway. But our impact as a laboratory for climate citizenship, and this is what is going to be the focus of our panel discussion today. I find it interesting that long after we've quote-unquote decarbonized, the Rutgers community members, including everyone who's here, perhaps people that will not be here anymore, but will have shouldered the legacy of this work, will be able to engage with our changing climate in a number of different ways. So our charge then is to prepare the Rutgers community members as a whole people to leverage their distinctive talents, their roles, their interests, to be active and resilient climate citizens. You heard from Nancy Cantor about being a change agent. So it's through this preparation that we will maximize the ultimate impact of our collective efforts. I'd like to introduce the 5 people who are joining me here today. And they're all doing very important work in very diverse areas of this very vibrant sandbox. I'm also going to give them each a chance to talk about what they're doing in this arena, and then it's really up to all of you and them to engage in this roundtable discussion. So to my left is Rebecca Cypess, who I've known for a while now, is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Mason Gross School of the Arts. Welcome, Rebecca. Jack Chen, known to many of us, is the inaugural Clement A. Price Professor of Public History, and Humanities at Rutgers Newark, and also directs the Clement Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience. Welcome, Jack. Amanda O'Lear is a member of the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center Climate Corps, and I'm particularly delighted that she's a graduate student. I have a particular fondness towards the graduate student experience, graduate student at the Blaustein School of Public Planning, Planning and Public Policy, Holly Nelson, sitting to her left, is an associate professor of practice in the Department of Landscape Architecture, one of our very leading programs in the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Welcome, Holly, good to have you here. And then finally, I think the bedrock of the vibrancy in the climate action initiative comes and emanates from the voices of our undergraduates. And Kendall Soto is the chair of the Rutgers University Student Assembly Sustainability Subcommittee, the RUSA subcommittee, a member of our Office of Climate Action Student Advisory Board, and an undergrad student in the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Kendall, welcome, and we truly appreciate all of what you represent and you lead. So, isn't that an amazing panel of very diverse stakeholder groups, interests? Let me start with Rebecca, you first. The question to you, perhaps broadly, is for the sake of the audience here and people who are listening in, how do you sort of begin to view as the role of the arts in the work ahead for climate action?
Thank you so much, Prabhas, and thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. This is very exciting, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So at Mason Gross School of the Arts, we strive to create art that's deeply relevant to the pressing issues of our day. The arts can have a tremendous impact, right? They communicate, they translate. I think there should be a slide coming. They communicate and they translate, they engage, they demonstrate care. There we go. They build empathy. They promote reflection, and they inspire action. Mason Gross is home to artists from a range of disciplines whose work addresses, responds to, and galvanizes us to action on climate change. There are two examples that I'd like to share with you today that show how our faculty, students, and staff are working to address this complex issue. In a quest to inspire deeper connection to nature, Scott Ordway, a composer on the music faculty, wrote a new piece of music exploring our local environment. Scott's work is called Watershed, and it uses a text by biologist Lena Struve, a professor in the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Lena's text is made up entirely of the Latin names of plants and animals living in our local environment. The piece was premiered by the Rutgers Voorhees Choir, which is made up of both majors and non-majors, so Mason Gross and non-Mason Gross students, presented first in the Cow Tunnel at Rutgers Gardens last September. And it asks whether music can inspire us to care about our environment more deeply. Let's hear a short excerpt, please. Thank you. That piece was written for an event called the March to Rutgers Gardens, organized by dance professor Julia Ritter, together with Annette Freitag of the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, to engage the New Brunswick community in rethinking access to Rutgers Gardens. So the students in Voorhees Choir gained a whole new perspective on their relationship to nature, and so did all of the participants in the march. A second example comes from the choreographer and dancer Jody Sperling, whose work addresses climate change and other crises facing the natural world. In 2015, Jody was choreographer in residence on a polar ice research ship in the Arctic. What was her role on this ship? To create artwork that communicated the urgency of climate change. And one of the results that she created from this journey was the choreographed video Ice Flow, which Jody filmed on sea ice. So please let's see a short clip from this video. Thank you. So these two clips, I think, are really excellent examples of science communication in other forms, right? In forms that perhaps we're less used to seeing. Jody is now teaching a 3-credit undergraduate course open to all students at Rutgers, New Brunswick, called Performing Climate Change, in which she teaches students how to use movement and dance to represent and respond to the climate crisis. This is part of a budding collaboration between Mason Gross and the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences that we hope will result in a new minor that crosses the arts with environmental science. We've convened a cross-school committee to work on this pedagogical initiative, as well as research collaborations and public-facing programming. We have lots of other projects in the works, and many already completed, from documentary filmmaking to painting, from graphic design to theater, including the use of theater improvisation skills to teach science communication. I'd be glad to speak with anyone about any of this at greater length. You could see my email on the slide. I'll just close by saying Mason Gross is a small school. I think that in the last couple of years, we've taken conscious steps to become more open and integrated with the rest of the university, but we will never be able to sort of be the owner of the arts at Rutgers, nor do we want to. I think I and Dean Jason Geary see our role as bearing the standard of the arts across the university and working with partners in New Brunswick, in Newark, and Camden to think about how we can champion and promote the arts as a crucial element of research in all areas, but with great urgency in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me now turn to Jack Chen, who, as I mentioned, directs the Clement A. Price Institute. The Institute prides itself as a campus-based, community-engaged center for the public history project, the public humanities project, and arts committed to what you might consider to be critical thinking and dialogue in civic life. So Jack, what comes to mind as you think about how the Price Institute, perhaps heretofore, has engaged with the climate action, but perhaps particularly how it might think of sort of leapfrogging ahead in this area?
Thank you very much. Thank you all for organizing this and being here. The title of the reference to my title, Through the Portal Lightly, is to Arundhati Roy's The Pandemic as a Portal. And I'll just give you a brief excerpt from it. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our data banks, dead ideas, and dead rivers behind us, or we can walk through lightly, ready to imagine another world and to fight for it. As a social and cultural historian working in the tradition and honored to working in the tradition of Clement Price and also Dean Jan Lewis, I really am new to this system and really trying to, in some ways, do field research on my campus, but also across the system to see what might be possible. So one of the questions I have emerged with is how might the Price Institute help divest and decolonize those dead rivers? In our case, the Passaic River is just one of them. The Hackensack River is also another. How can we also disinvest and decolonize from the dead ideas? One of the particular ideas is the Puritans discovered Newark in 1666. And that it was Robert Treat, who was both the Puritan leader and the militarist who had founded Newark. How can we move this portal, through this portal lightly, to imagine a new system grounded in social and ecological justice worth fighting for? In trying to, so one thing I just wanted to mention is that in learning by doing, we've fortunately been able to get an NSF grant. So in what I'm talking about is I'm hoping we can quickly adapt these framing questions that I'm raising into actual concrete actions and research that engage with multiple communities. So the following are really quick notes that muse on how the Price Institute can become an interlinking lab, both on our campus, but also hopefully more broadly, and to become kind of an incubator and also an expediter, an accelerator. So notes on truth to historical power. We can debate about the dates of the Anthropocene and when that shift happens, yet as I look back, a very serviceable formulation has been readily at our fingertips. Here I'm referring to the 1967 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence talk. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. With this enduring truth, how might we make this happen practically at Rutgers University and at Newark? And as a research and teaching system, how might we at Rutgers overcome such fractured and embedded systems of knowing that separate out and kind of isolate oftentimes the specialist domains of what we do? A modest beginning is to reckon with the ongoing unresolved legacies. For example, what is the ongoing legacy of land-grant universities that are still being benefited from the historical land grab? If you go on land grab universities, you'll just see that chart and the mapping and history of that legacy. And what is New Jersey's and Rutgers' active irresponsibility to the living indigenous people still here today? These are fundamental questions that we have to grapple with and reckon with. Notes to hacking know-how. Speaking to many fantastic and open people throughout the system and also in our communities and those who are working in governments and the public sector, have really helped me clarify what does this mean. What's become clear to me is the need to slow the rush of everyday business as usual and to take deliberative quality time to build relationships, to focus, and to pay attention together, separate from the structures that we oftentimes find ourselves in. As many of our Rutgers, in many ways our Rutgers system in some ways, our Rutgers system is woefully behind. I feel like we have to also acknowledge these things. For example, we have no indigenous studies in our host system. I think we're the only Big Ten campus that is actually without that. We have no core interdisciplinary and applied social and ecological studies where the central questions are around questions of justice. And that also, given the legacy of eugenics in our state and in the region, how can we begin to de-eugenicize the legacy impacts of administrative and statistical systems, which actually linger to this day and continue to impact the sorting system of the fit from the unfit? And finally, at Newark, we finally have a minor. We just got it passed on intersectional disability studies, which is fantastic. Yet even that is still fragmented from other areas of interrelated counter-knowledges that also stem from eugenics, but we somehow splinter our ability to look at these things without putting them back into the context in which they emerged. Can we learn from research on the undercommons, for example, and the third university, where the students, what students want to learn and pursue, and is not in the curriculum, but is forced to become extracurricular and furtive learning? So attention to these fundamental social and ecological justice questions are actually a major challenge that I feel like in some ways is overarching. Notes on collaborating communities. We at Rutgers have a chance to work with what we have, and we can further realize Dr. King's beloved community in the area of social and ecological justice. If we further realign in building deep and enduring relationships of foundational trust, we have, for example, at the historical root, we need to reckon with the 3 New Jersey recognized communities of indigenous people and their diasporas. We need to more fully reckon with how enslavement was entwined intimately with that originary dispossession. And we also need to really take seriously indigenous and traditional environmental knowledges of the land, the soil, the air, the water, that are necessarily a part of how we're going to get out of this mess that we're in. And finally, Dr. King's shift from a thing-oriented culture of possession to a person-oriented culture also needs to shift to what Winona LaDuke calls the graceful transition to a planetary care system of all living relations and an understanding of the beloved wholeness of what we all need to survive and flourish. And I'll just wrap up by saying that there's a chance, I think, for us to not strictly think about the scientific and research and technological necessity of getting out of this mess that we're in, but also to be thinking and imagining what a culture of care that includes really the planet. It's not simply people above the nature, but we as a part of nature, and how can the care for the planet itself also be at the core of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I found your last words to be interesting as an engineer myself in thinking about technology solutions. The idea that you would want to bring together people who are thinking about the culture of care together with the innovations to scale. That would be an interesting project for the Climate Action Plan. Thank you. I'm turning to Amanda, you now. Tell us a little bit more about how your experience as a member of the CORE, the Climate Change Resource Center, in your view, helps to understand what climate impacts look like, what might mitigation look like, and how can that be woven into the fabric of the Climate Action Plan?
Thank you. So I think to kind of give you an idea of what the Climate Corps experience was for me, I'm going to go into some detail on some of the projects that I got to work on. So I've worked with the Climate Corps for a year now, and what the Climate Corps is a group of graduate students with varying expertise that are working to support the Resource Center's efforts in helping New Jersey better adapt to and mitigate climate change. And so one of the first projects I had the opportunity to work on was looking at flood risk in New Jersey, flood vulnerability, in particular for the state's historic resources, being historic districts, historic properties, landmarks. And so what I was able to consider was what's the current flood risk now and what's the flood risk going into the future, whether this be with more extreme precipitation events or with sea level rise. So I had the opportunity to do some GIS analysis using current flood risk being based on FEMA's flood insurance rate maps, and then projected flood risk being height above the mean higher high water level. And so in the end, I was able to produce a statewide analysis of what properties and historic resources are at risk, as long as giving an idea of what's happening at the local community level. And so one of the goals of the Climate Corps is to make sure that the work that's being done is available to those that are going to use it in the state. A lot of the times we're focused on providing work to municipalities so that they can incorporate it into the analyses that they're doing, their hazard mitigation plans. And so I ended up putting this into a story map, which is a way to put the GIS maps on an online platform that anyone can access and go through the analysis and be walked through the steps on how to use it. And so this sort of work is, I think, exactly the kind of work that we're talking about here today, to let students be able to produce something that's actually usable now by communities. And so the Climate Corps is a perfect place for this to happen, because not only are you have the staff at the Resource Center that are able to help with any questions, but as a cohort of graduate students, we're meeting bi-weekly, able to bounce questions off of each other, troubleshoot ideas, and just learn what everyone is working on. So it's a way to have this interdisciplinary kind of collaboration while still doing meaningful work that's beyond the classroom of just learning about what you might do in a few years. And so in addition to that project, I also had the opportunity to work alongside the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance, which is a network of organizations across the state working to advance science-based climate change strategies. And so we were looking particularly at carbon storage and sequestration for the state's forest resources and wetland resources. And so this was an opportunity for me to look beyond at what New Jersey's doing, but to look across the country and get an idea of what reports have been released, what are other states doing now, and how can we take that back and put it to use within the state at a state level and as well as a local level. So through meetings with the Climate Change Alliance, we had meetings, we did surveys, and we were able to take these ideas we pulled from other states and also new innovative ones that came from the members of the Alliance to produce 2 different reports that are available on the Alliance's website that provide advice or at least strategies that people within the state have an opportunity to use if they so choose. Sorry. But the best part about this work that I was able to do at the Climate Corps with the Alliance was I got to meet people from across the state in different organizations in different sectors, something I would never be able to do in the classroom, while still getting to do the work that I'm interested in making sure that our state is prepared for climate change going forward. And so the Climate Corps is just what I think a great opportunity to be able to come out of the classroom, to do some innovative new work, and to do it with a variety of people and just learning along the way, but having a good time while I'm doing it.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Amanda. You can almost sense that passion, the excitement. Keep that going, Amanda. And one quick question to you is the alliance you mentioned. Was that an alliance within the state of New Jersey?
Yes, it's
Okay.
only New Jersey organizations, but they work alongside or what leads with some of the people at the Climate Change Resource Center.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's turn to Holly next, who, as I reminded you, is at the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences and is a landscape architect. Holly, tell us about the Living Labs. I think the slides already sparked our interest. So.
Thank you. I love the idea of the university being a laboratory for climate citizenship.
Yeah.
And I'm a big advocate for thinking of the outdoor campus as a learning environment. There's lots of ways that we can make this happen. As a landscape architect teaching sustainable design, there's no better way to convince my students about green technology than to have them design and then build it. On a science campus, our laboratories can be living labs. In planting design class for the last 5 or so years, we've worked with different campus stakeholders to create demonstration gardens. Students learn how to plan a large garden, and that means making drawings to communicate with their clients and organize the construction. They make intricate drawings with every plant represented by circles showing their sizes and placement, and there can be 400 or more plants that look like a whole lot of circles on a drawing. But when we plant the garden together, those circles turn into a place that was designed for people's enjoyment. We can solve problems and make places for people. These gardens are human scale, and they're designed to do something productive. Think stormwater or food production, but to also create gathering spaces and social areas. Our 50-foot-long rain garden holds stormwater, but it's also a place to sit and relax. We started a plant library showcasing mostly native ground covers for an eroding slope in front of the landscape architecture building. And we built an urban ag garden behind our central offices on campuses to show how a veggie garden is also a great place to have lunch or do your homework. The urban ag garden produces food and demonstrates the small steps that people can take toward a more sustainable New Jersey. Students designed and built planters, tables, chairs, a trellised fence for beans and spring peas that also serves as a way to keep the deer out. Several classes participated in the build until COVID shut down the university and construction came to a screeching halt. We kept going as soon as the campus opened up to researchers. When everything was unraveling around us, we wanted to build something new in defiance of the virus. We're delighted that staff adopted the garden for social justice. The produce they tend feeds hungry and food insecure students. On Rutgers Day, our alumni congregated at the Urban Ag Garden, so it's also a space for entertaining visitors. So it's about people, and it's about experiential learning. It gets students outdoors, collaboratively producing something for everybody's benefit. Choreographing a build project with 20+ students is also an event. It's hands-on learning that brings people together for a common purpose. Gardens bring people together in the public realm. Gardens can also display the research produced at a university and make it part of our everyday life. Something you pass by on your way to class, or a nice spot to stop and do your homework, or maybe something you pass by on purpose while taking a walk. We can take the science that happens on our campus and showcase these ideas for a better future in our living laboratories. This could mean outdoor classrooms for design students who build the gardens they design. Entomology students can study pollinators in these learning gardens. Ecology students can learn to identify forbs and native grasses. We've teamed up with the engineering department to design a drone playground so engineering students can train their drones to do maneuvers. Our dining hall picks fresh mint from an herb garden built by a Burn seminar to make their fruit smoothies. And the campus nursery school got tot-sized veggie gardens. Next year, we plan to turn the detention basin into a rain garden for public housing community. And all of this happens because a lot of people work together to undertake something that is too complex to do alone. This type of collaboration is an antidote for the isolation caused by COVID. It supports sustainable social sustainability as well as environmental sustainability. We can work together to express our values in our physical environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. You could just sort of animate all of those words, and I could sort of see a video flashing in my head about the collaboratives, the innovations projects, the public coming into those spaces. Bob, we have to figure out ways for the climate action groups to be literally having their retreats at those pods. Thank you, Holly. And then finally to Kendall. Kendall, you ready?
Yes, thank you.
So speak to us about what does it mean for a student to be an activist, to be a part of the movement, how to channelize all of that energy into a self-organized body of fellow students who want to get change happen, but have to sort of work through the system, with the system to make it happen. How do you plan to be a part of this climate action, and how do you mobilize? So we only have 5 minutes, but we can continue the discussion after that.
Yes, 5 minutes to talk about what we've all been working on the past 20 years of my life. So, but one quote I want to start off with is what I tell myself when I get a little bit overwhelmed, or what I hope my peers and everyone else in this room can understand is, forgive me for not knowing the author, but the quote says, in nature, they do not hurry, science does not hurry, but everything is accomplished. So what I like to think about is when in student assembly we're operating on trying to be the most formal and really replicate what it looks like in those Senate hearings. And while it's really serious, and some people like myself, when I first entered those rooms as a student representative, I felt like this is a lot, but it realizes every issue that we're pushing towards helping and advocating for, we're taking a very serious stance on. And so I really admire in the student assembly is our collaboration with administrators. We, like Kyle Cato said, the person of operations, we're constantly emailing him, and we do that because we like to hear no. We like to hear, you can't do that project, but you can do this one. And one of the most interesting things that I've realized is it's really remarkable that we can work as students with the people highest of this university, and also just, we're not done. We're never done. Just because we had those conversations, we had those meetings, we had those town halls, we're always looking forward to the following year, what we can keep going. So to give a picture of how the student assembly operates, we have a couple different committees. So we have the University Affairs Committee, and below that is the Sustainability Subcommittee, which I'm a part of. And then we have other groups that we've been trying to expand our reach with working on sustainability efforts, like the Legislative Affairs Committee. So one of the current things we're campaigning for right now is an environmental rights amendment to the state constitution. And what that means for us is we signed a bill advocating for it, and we signed a bill dedicating our work to work with other organizations. So this means that we're talking to our indigenous rights clubs, we're talking to our Students for Environmental Awareness clubs, and we're saying, what does this look like for you guys? What does this mean, and how can we advocate that on a larger level? So we've had some of my peers in the Student Assembly, other representatives, actually attend organizations of Clean Water Action and organizations of the Sierra Club. And so we recognize that community action because that's what we're doing on a small scale, and we're trying to expand that. Other ways that I really like what we're doing is we have simple things such as Rutgers University Student Assembly Cup Panions, which is given out to every student the first time they use their takeout service at the dining hall. So you get a free reusable bag and a sustainable water bottle. And while that may be simple, it's that first step of recognizing, hey, this is sustainability on campus, and if you're going to use our services, we're going to try and help you do it sustainably. We've done other really cool projects, and what I have always viewed leadership to be is empowerment of other groups, empowerment of the already hard-working students that we have. So one of the other STEM organizations has recently proposed, and we just passed a legislation in Student Assembly to fund an agroponics, if I'm saying that correctly, sustainable farming initiative for our food pantry at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And so we gave them $10,000 to just pay for their operations so that they could have fresh lettuce heads and any other desired things inside the food pantry. So they use fish, it adds B12, and it's a lot more sciencey than I can communicate right now. But it's really amazing that we have those resources. So I want to thank the Rutgers administration for giving us this platform to do fundamental projects like this. And one of the most interesting things that I think is our obstacles is not just using the tools we already have, but sharing them. So one of the obstacles I think we're facing, which unfortunately I wasn't able to make it, is the Big Ten School Alliance had a on the Hill big conference, and it was all the representatives, a few from each school, and one of the biggest fallbacks that they had was their sustainability panel, where only few of them showed up, and a lot of them, it was not directed well. And so while I wasn't there, I hope to be there next year. And one thing I want to say is Rutgers University is a leader. We have officially divested from fossil fuels. We have that path on the way. You know, we have dedicated a complete office of climate action. Now, it's not only enough to say that we've committed, we have to stay on track, and what we have to do is we have to use the network. I'm really happy, and I hope I get to introduce myself to a lot of the people in this room, but what I really want to see is us going to Newark and Camden and saying, hey, let's try and get agroponics funded in your food pantry, and let's try to help food insecurity students there, and then let's try to help the other Big Ten schools understand how they can work on their contracts with fossil fuels and divest. These are all different projects that we've done, but to really make an impact, we have to share those resources.
All right. You could gauge that very palpable spirit of our students. There's only one undergraduate on this panel here, but just imagine the energy and the power of that entire student body. In the previous panel, you heard from different campuses, but imagine the collective powers of all of those campuses coming together. And that's still our project for the future. So thank you, Kendall. Let's see if there are any more questions from the virtual group or from, yeah? and if they are directed to a particular speaker.
Yes, there were general accolades for all of the speakers, so thank you very much. I believe this first question is posed mainly at you, Holly. The question is how is Rutgers working to coordinate efforts in other institutional areas such as research labs and facilities to advance the use of more native plants and understanding how these native plants and species are beneficial to our local environment?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to answer that by saying there's a lot of interest, and the trickiest part of that is stewardship, because the landscape maintenance industry isn't so geared to native plants yet. It's like a new area, and the thing about native plants, as opposed to lots of lawn and kind of a monoculture thing, is that you have to know your different invasive plants. You have to recognize them and pull them out, and it's almost more of a gardening situation than a like mow it all down thing. So it's harder, and you have to be smarter. And I think that's also a really interesting opportunity for us as a university to engage with that topic, because I think that's a really big sticky wicket in all of this, the stewardship component. So I hope that answered the question.
I also wanted to take the opportunity to just make a quick mention. We're talking about labs, living labs, experiential labs, civic-minded labs here. There's a particularly interesting project that's brewing right now. It's the incubator at the intersection of health and climate. And so if you are interested in being a part of research in that space, please reach out to Dr. Marika Dunn. She's in the Office for Research. Again, Marika Dunn, if you are interested in being a part of research at the nexus of climate and health. This is a brand new incubator that's launching at Rutgers.
And if we have any in-person questions, please raise your hand. Prabhas will call on you, and I'll bring over the mic.
And Carrie, any more questions on the virtual group in the meantime? We can parallelize. I'm acutely aware that we now have maybe about 5 minutes on the clock.
Okay,
Oh, I think there's a question back there. Marta, did you have a question?
Could you give us an update on reducing plastics overall and recycling plastics? Is that something Moghe was heard of?
No, the online audience.
Sorry, we couldn't quite hear you.
Sorry. I wanted to hear about updates on reducing plastics overall. I work in a lab. We try to recycle, but we know that we're limited. And also just plastics overall, food, everything. Anybody have a story about that?
If the panel has any thoughts on it, or Kevin or Bob want to chime in.
So you should go to one of the procurement sessions and waste management sessions this afternoon.
Yep. So that's, I think, a plug for our afternoon sessions and our workshops, right? Thank you. Yeah, a hugely important question. And there's a question at the back. I can't tell who that is. Is that you, Monica? Yes. All right.
My question is, what is Rutgers doing as a collaborative for renewable energy and storage technologies? I think we're like disjointed on that very important topic, and ultimately this is going to be making the difference in actionable work that will help reduce our CO2 fossil emissions.
Yep. I mean, that's a brilliant question, and it's not escaped the minds of all of the people here. So I'll let perhaps Bob take a stab at it.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be a broken record, but basically we're saying go to one of the energy sessions this afternoon. You'll get to talk to people working on that part of climate action.
Yeah, so I think I'm sort of providing a bit of a zoomed out view from my vantage point. You have a slate of different technologies and innovations in terms of carbon capture, sequestration, and the question really is for the institution is how do you figure out your space as a sort of a pathway in the education, research, and potentially translatable technologies, knowing fully well that you're not commercializing. But how do you prepare technologies to be at scale and in a sort of a primed approach And there are multiple institutions that have thrown out large challenges like that. And the question for Rutgers really is, what is our approach around this? And what are the policies and the practices that can undergird that? So thank you for that question. Again, a plug for staying on for the afternoon sessions. And we have a question at the back there.
Hi. This is really a question for Rebecca and Jack. I was wondering if you could talk about, I think a lot of times people think about climate change as something that will happen, as opposed to it's been happening for a very, very long time. And I was wondering if you could both talk about how arts or history, stories, humanities can really help us to understand the ways that climate change affects individuals, communities, and really bring us that immediacy that it has actually affected many communities disproportionately for a really long time. Jack, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really quite important. I think this is where my chance to work with the Munsee Lenape people, which are north of the Raritan River, has been quite important because it helps us gain a deeper historical perspective on the dramatic changes of the land that have happened, even really especially grounded in colonialism and settler colonialism. To take that into account and understand the kind of dramatic clear-cutting of the lands, and that contrasted to the thousands of years of actual more indigenous scientific kind of engagement with the lands is quite important. And that understanding, I think, goes back to the Ice Ages. The stories go back to the Ice Ages, in which the shoreline, the Wisconsin Glacier had hit the area but began receding, and the shoreline, as that glacier began receding and melting, actually changed profoundly where the shoreline was, right? So we've been through this, but in the short kind of modern history that we measure progress and development, it's hard to understand. We tend to think techno-fixes and engineering will do the job. But that deeper kind of engagement of regeneration in living with the land and in the soil, the air, all those kinds of questions, I think, are important knowledges. And more recently, the IPCC has been acknowledging the importance of this kind of knowledge in terms of how we actually have to take these regenerative agricultural approaches and these intimacies with the land that have developed over thousands of years much more seriously than we ever have. So.
Thank you, Jack. Rebecca?
If I just jump in,
the immediacy question.
Yes, yeah. So I think it's a really important question, and I'll go back to the two videos, the little short excerpts of much larger works that I was able to show here. I think there's a metaphor to sort of help understand what's going on there. Jack mentioned before the need to kind of slow down and notice, right, rather than sort of just rushing through and getting to the prize of the grant dollars or whatever, but actually noticing what's going on around us. So, for example, in Scott's musical composition, where there's this kind of, that you start from the premise of the little organisms that we often don't notice because we're rushing from one place to the next. But, sort of amplifying that through pronouncing their names and kind of singing them, and then echoing, having those names echo and resonate in that cow tunnel. And also the costume that Jodi's wearing in that amazing video, where the costume kind of represents ice breaking up and her motions across this vast wilderness, really kind of help to highlight the problems that she's encountering. And that the science researchers that she's working with are trying to communicate out. I think that those things help us to kind of reframe our thinking and recognize the immediacy of the problem and the scale of the problem, that even when the problem is something that we can't see and we don't always stop to notice, it is worth dwelling on. So art helps us with that kind of reflection, the amplification of, things or people or voices that are not normally amplified. And it sort of forces us to reckon with what's going on right now.
Thank you. I just, in the last 30 seconds, I want to even suggest that perhaps there are ways in which our sort of channels of communication, I think it was Amanda who spoke about the digital project. and making sure that the work that's being done is making its way through to the important stakeholders. Imagine layering the stories and the arts on top of those very projects that are very data-based, because I think stories and arts draw you in and they heal you. They don't get you into a state of frenzy, but it's exactly that kind of a composure that you need in order to look at the data and then think about reacting. So imagine sort of amalgamating your approaches together. Thank you all for joining us. It's a very short break before the next session starts, I think in now 4.5 minutes. Stay tuned. Thank you.